The Burlingame Public Library is pleased to present this video of Celebrating Budi Darma, recorded on September 20th, 2022. Due to technical issues, the introduction was not taped. The presentation begins with Tiffany Tsao explaining how she met Budi Darma and started translating his collection, Orang Bloomington, published this year by Penguin Classics as People From Bloomington. Please enjoy this conversation between Tiffany Tsao, educator Diana Budi Darma, and presenter Lian Gouw from Dawling Publishing.
I talked about it with an author, the author I was translating and working with at the time, Norman Erickson Basari Wu. And then Norman said, hey, one day he said, hey, are you still interested in translating Orang Bloomington? And I said, yes, of course. And, he said like, oh, well, actually, I can put you in touch with Budi Darma, and, maybe you can go to Surabaya to meet him, to ask permission. And we arranged it. And so actually we both ended up going to Surabaya to meet him, to ask permission. And yeah, Barbudi said yes. And that was where it started. So that was in 2019. Yeah, I mean, just asking Lian, how did you end up knowing, like, how did you meet Barbudi, and how did you, come to know each other? Because I know you both were quite good friends.
Yeah, that we go back quite a while back here. And most likely it was at an event of Petra University where he also taught. What I remember mostly is that we immediately clicked. And then after that, we were in touch via email. And until COVID, I was going home every year. And we always met. Regardless of how busy each of us was, we always met. I loved Barbudi's genuineness and his simplicity, despite the fact that he was such a prominent figure in Indonesia's literary world, actually internationally. So that was my connection with Barbudi early on. Cynthia, can I please, for the non-Indonesian audience, explain fast the word pa, because they will hear us say that pa, boom, ba. And those are all ways of addressing people we respect in Indonesian. Pa is short for bapa, which means father. Bu is short for ibu, which means mother in Indonesian, and mba, which is like sister. So if you hear Tiffany, Diana, and myself go mba, bapa, ibu, this is what we are doing. We are being respectful. That's all.
Thank you for explaining.
You're welcome.
Can I add a quick follow-up question? Is that all right, Lian? So, Dawling publishes translations of Indonesian literature. So surely, while I was, thinking about, oh, I wonder is anyone going to publish a translation of Orang Bloomington? You must have, the subject must have come up with Barbudi at some point.
Yeah. Barbudi offered Dawling the translations for both Orang Bloomington as well as Olenka. And I felt so bad for not being able to accept his offer. It was just that both stories are set in America and they deal with American people. And Dalang focuses on stories set in Indonesia with Indonesian characters. So I really felt terrible because I wanted it so bad, but I didn't want to break my own rules. So, but at that time, I told him, I said, don't worry, because given time, I am sure that you will get translated and be published by one of the larger, American publishers. And guess what? What are we doing right now? We are celebrating your translation of Orang-Orang Bloomington. Huh? We are sitting here celebrating People from Bloomington, which was published by no less than Penguin Classics.
Yeah.
And those are 7 thought-provoking, very endearing stories. And Tiffany, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. I thank you for bringing that to the Western Hemisphere. And Barbudi up there, smile on us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just for the audience to know, this event was actually Lian's idea. She reached out just a few months ago and said, why don't we do an event, and I was like quite touched. Because usually, I don't know, I think it's very rare in the literary world, someone else will agree to do an event for you. You usually have to do a little bit yourself, but yeah, just very grateful for this kind of support and enthusiasm. And so grateful also that it was Lian's idea to invite Barbudi's daughter, Diana, who's joining us today. So I actually have a question for Diana, because actually, when in conversing with Barbudi during the translation project over email and via WhatsApp, via text, he mentioned that he was able to bring his family over the second when he was doing the PhD portion of his degree of his education, and that. I'm just wondering if you have any memories of that time, because I think you were quite young when you were there in Bloomington, but just interested to get your perspective as well.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I call you Tiffany because you're way younger than me, so I don't call you Mba, yeah? It's not fair. Okay, so Tiffany, yes, it's surprisingly, I was very young when I went to America to, is it a state called Bloomington? No, the state is in Indianapolis. So yes, I was about 7 years old when I moved to Bloomington for almost four until 5 years. And then when I was in the beginning of my middle school, I went back to Surabaya. What makes it interesting about living in Bloomington is during our Bloomington time, my parents continued to speak Javanese to the family. Yeah. At that time, I did not know what it means, yeah, but they wanted me and my brothers to remain Indonesian by maintaining our language and traditions. And then my father considered our move to Bloomington. This is what Budi Darma is. It's simply as a study assignment. He never regarded the time as a luxurious time condition there. So when he was living in, when he was doing his PhD there, he only, his journey was only from the campus to his room, because in his room there's, everything is there. So he always from campus to the room. In Bloomington, we lived in an apartment complex, maybe everybody know, called the Tulip Tree. And the number of the apartment was 910. And because it was more than 3 years living there, I attended a public school and had to learn English quickly because I did not know English at all. I never traveled, and I was too young to learn the language at home. Fortunately, I made friends with the children in our apartment complex. They were very friendly and they were very helpful, and they always, when I go to public school, they always walked to school with me. So that's how I use my language, use English all the time. This and going to school and enabled me to quickly pick up English. As if it was very fast. About a year, I was able to communicate with the teachers, with friends, with people in the apartment, and so on. So, but the thing is that I don't remember anything specific my father mentioned about our time in Bloomington. Maybe because he thinks it's the same in Surabaya and it's the same in Bloomington. Well, that's my opinion, my assumption. Okay. Maybe this is because he regarded the time merely as a time to, to study, only to study and finish fast, because he wants to go back to UNESA, to the State University of Surabaya. This is part of my father's personality, I think. I've mentioned a bit. He was a very simple man and did not like to brag. I think that's, I hope this helps you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
I don't have any memories of living in I have memories, but memories, my father sitting down, reading, writing, going to campus, and then, talking to people, and then talking to the family, speaking Javanese. Sometimes he does not speak Javanese, has this how you say that, level, you have the soft, you have the very polite, and you have the daily communication, and then you have something what we called, I don't know how to say it in English, but
like more formal.
Formal, above formal, there's the polite Javanese. I don't know how to say that, but no, forget it. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, we so appreciate. You're in a unique position to talk about people's process.
He has time to. He can speak English. My father's English is very good, writing, reading, speaking, but he does not use that often. He prefers to use Javanese and Indonesia, like Bulian. Bulian,
That's right. Right. Amongst our own.
Okay.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, that's lovely. It was lovely to hear. Getting a little bit into the work, though, just a little bit, Tiffany. When I read the introduction, which you wrote the introduction to the collection, which, or in the English translation, of course, and you mentioned the ongoing debate about if it's ethical for a writer to use subject matter and experiences that are not their own. And I think that term in America that's been used a lot is appropriation. And I can easily see the downside of this. It can be really dangerous because somebody could rely on stereotypes, or they might be unconsciously biased or unfortunately racist. But do you think there's any upsides? Because obviously, Budi Darma's collection is really humanist and wonderful. So I just was wondering if you could talk maybe about some of the upsides possibly.
And I felt very strongly about, this project and bringing it to an audience in English, primarily because of the upsides that are possible in such a project. I think I guess the accusation of appropriation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very valid concern, right? And you know, that has to do with you know, history in literature of and in particular, right? If I'm just thinking of the Anglophone tradition.
Yeah.
Or the English language tradition, right? Colonial, you know, colonization enabling
Mm-hmm.
people from Western countries or, you know, colonial countries to colonizer countries to, you know, write about life in, you know, the Far East or the Orient and all of that. And that's something actually that Budi Darma was aware of as well. You know, in doing my research for the introduction, I came across an essay where he was talking about that particular problem. And this is why I found People of Bloomington so interesting, because it is actually, I think, I don't want to say a counter impulse, but it is an impulse that is saying I'd say it's almost a gesture in good faith to say like, no, this is actually possible. Cross-cultural depictions and representations in literature are possible because we're all human. And I think there is that very strong element in the collection. And also when I was talking with him during the translation process, this sense that he felt very strongly that human nature was essentially at base the same, regardless of whether it be in Bloomington or whether it be in Surabaya. And in the foreword for the original version of the collection, he actually says, you know, if I had been anywhere else, I probably would have written people in London, people in Surabaya, people in Dublin, you know, this idea that people are the same everywhere. And as you can tell, probably, and if you've read the collection, this conviction also that people are a little bit eccentric and strange. I think that is, you know, it's an upside to remember that, especially now where conversations can get really divisive. And I think that has to do with, you know, just thinking about the power dynamics of how literary representation has happened. But, you know, I think this is like, so rarely do we find books translated that are the other way, right? Not just of, you know, Western people writing about the Far East. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's very interesting.
If I may ask a question, about how you translate. There's a lot of people are very curious about how you translate the book. So what is your technique, if I may know, to translate atmosphere?
Yeah, I feel like it depends a lot actually on the author or on the work. Like it really, I try to be led by that particular author and their particular style. And you know, your father, Lian, had a very, very particular style. But you know, one example, I guess, would stand out to me from the short story collection itself, from People from Bloomington, Orang-Orang Bloomington. There's this scene from the opening story, The Old Man with No Name, or Laki-Laki Tua Tanpa Nama. And it's a very tragic scene. I'm trying not to give that much away, but like one of the characters is dying, and you know, the snow is falling and falling very slowly. And I just found that like the pace and the rhythm of the original story all slows down, right? And it's sort of the snow falling at night, mingling with the blood that's, you know, trickling down the road on the sidewalk. And for that, I remember very specifically thinking, I do need to, you know, have the translation convey this atmosphere, and, you know, so I tried to take my cues from the original rhythm and how it slowed down, the rhythm of the sentences, and to not replicate that rhythm exactly, but replicate it in English, have its own same sort of rhythm and the phrasing in that particular scene. And I remember even just, you know, I'd read it out loud again and again just to make sure I got it right, because it's such a critical scene in that story. But yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah.
Very nice. I wish I can translate like you. Atmosphere is always something difficult to translate. Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, so Tiffany, how closely did you work then with Barbudi during the translation process? Can you share a few things you talked to him about, and what was the interaction like?
Yeah, so I'd say we worked quite closely. I always welcome it when I get to interact with authors. Usually I'm worried that I'm bothering them too much. Usually I'm like, oh, they probably don't want to hear a million questions, like my silly questions about things. But Budi was, first we communicated via email, but then, as many Indonesian conversations do, we moved to WhatsApp, just for like little things here and there. And actually, this is an interesting story because during the translation process, we also, began, I guess, chatting about other things as well. So he's always, so thoughtful and would always ask me like, how are you? How's your husband? How are the kids? How are you doing during this pandemic? And I would also ask the same. And then finally, I just began to get curious because I thought to myself, like, like, the characters, a lot of them in People from Bloomington are elderly, are old. And I thought to myself, when Barbudi was younger and writing this, I wonder if he has a different perspective now that he is also elderly, like the characters in People from Bloomington. But I was a bit shy in asking because it seemed very impolite to say, hey, now you are old, what does it like, what's it like? So I was very hesitant in phrasing the question. So if I may, I just printed a little bit of our correspondence from it, if I may share. So I did end up crafting an email that was sort of very politely trying to ask this question. It's originally in Indonesian, but I translated it into English. Barbudi, may I ask a question that tends a bit more towards the personal regarding People from Bloomington? There are many old characters in the stories. These days, you aren't as young as you used to be, and not as young as when you wrote the short story collection. What has it been like to reread the elderly characters you created when you were younger? Sorry if this is an impolite question. Feel free to ignore it if you don't feel like answering it. So that was me trying to walk it back just in case. But of course, Barbudi was very warm and very frank and said, this is an excellent question and not offensive at all. And then he provided a bit of insight into his time at Bloomington, which I thought was like quite touching actually, and really got to the heart of what became then what I wanted to convey within the translation of the collection. Why so many old people in People from Bloomington? Because when I was in Bloomington, I enjoyed taking walks, to the point where I had all the streets memorized, including the alleys. Whenever I went walking, I would almost always cross paths with old people. Of these many old people, some were friendly, some were proud, some didn't care about me at all, AKA give a damn. There were even old people who would chase me to tell me stories. One of them told me that in his younger days, he had been a sheriff. With a note of pride, he showed me his sheriff's badge. There was also someone who told me that in his youth, he was part of a band and had toured various states with his fellow band members. He told me that one by one, all his friends had died. Apologies, Kak Tiffany, if you had met him yourself, you probably would have been struck by the extent to which his story was tinted with morbidity. I've probably already told you about the old people who would shop and such to kill time. They would drive to the supermarket just to buy a single item, go home to rest, then go to another supermarket to buy something else. After resting, they would go out again to yet another supermarket to buy yet another item. I had the impression that they were torn between wanting to guard their privacy on one hand and feeling lonely on the other. And I feel like that last sentence in particular is such an insight to the stories from People from Bloomington, these people who deeply yearn for human connection, yet themselves are so dislikable and they're actually quite suspicious of other people too. So they also want to keep their distance from other people. And I think there's that tension at the heart of all the stories. So I really appreciate that exchange that I was able to have with Barbudi.
Yeah, Barbudi was a very generous man. And that's one of the things that made him so special. Yeah. So what do you feel you gained, Tiffany, as a translator and as a writer from this translation project?
So actually, I'm not sure. Well, I mean, obviously, you know, in terms of technique and in terms of skill, it's always, you know, like every project teaches you something else. But also in terms of, I guess, the personal and human aspects of the project. So the translation.
In 14 minutes. If you have any materials to check out, please.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Oh, okay. So actually, what is it? I translated the collection mostly during the first part of the pandemic. So 2020, and you know, a lot of stuff was happening, and my life was very chaotic. I had my oldest kid just started kindergarten, and then I had to move online, and then basically, you know, spent all day like preventing him from having emotional meltdowns on online kindergarten, and then, you know, sort of entertaining him for the rest of the day. And then we had another, you know, a younger child who was doing things like taking all the toilet paper and putting it in the sink in the bathroom, and like moving all the stuff around the house, and that was also very chaotic. So I basically was like, okay, I have limited emotional and mental bandwidth at this time. I will just concentrate on translating orang-orang Bloomington, or people from Bloomington. And, you know, like, I was just struck actually, you know, by the fact that, you know, during my correspondence and with Barbudi on the translation process, that he was actually like really, you know, also concerned about like just the human aspect. So always, you know, was very, you know, asking how I was, asking my opinions on things, sharing interesting things, which, you know, like, he's quite an important author and was extremely busy at the time. Like, you know, I remember that he was saying like how heavy his workload was still in terms of teaching and administrative responsibilities at the university. And I was just so, yeah, just so touched that he would, you know, make the, like, still have the room to, I guess, take time to chat and talk. And, you know, he even looked up my work and read my first novel. And I was so surprised about that. You know, my own husband hasn't read like most of my books. So, you know, so, like, oh, that's very, you know, very kind. But I guess what I want to say is that, like, it just reminded me, and it felt really good to be, I guess, to have my work as a translator, but also myself as a human being, have that value, you know, that value still in the relationship. And I think that's also like somewhat at the heart of People from Bloomington. And so it was all sort of unified at the time. And it reminded me, I think, of, I guess, the human connections that we can foster and value as part of our literary endeavors as well. Because I think sometimes you wouldn't think so, because you think the literary and the personal are so combined, or the literary and the human, but sometimes it can get a bit impersonal. And yeah, that was really, yeah, nice. So I was very sad actually to hear the news that he passed away in August.
Yeah. Oh.
I'm gonna just interject just for a moment. I just want to let people know we have a couple of questions in the Q&A part, but we're going to get to them after. We're going to wrap up the conversation fairly soon and just do a very brief reading, because we really wanted you to hear both the Indonesian spoken as well as Tiffany's beautiful translation, how she manages to make it also sing. So we're not forgetting them, though. I see your two questions from Rifkul and from Norma, so thank you, and we will definitely get to them. So thank you for, and they're very thoughtful ones too, so we appreciate that.
Yes. Now, now, may I ask a question?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Sam.
After Tiffany, you know, explained how she communicates and writes and translate the work, I want to know about Lian. Yeah, how you determine, I'm sorry, I just want to, how do you determine that a translation is accurate? How would you do that? Once the book is finished, and then, you know, I don't know how you work to, evaluate or validize or something like that about the book. And yes, it's ready to be published. How would you do that?
Well, I have two monitors. On the left, I have the work, the translation that I'm working on. And to the right, I have the original work. And this is what I do the whole day. Left and right, left and right. And sometimes it takes me to read the work out loud because I look, number one, of course, for an accurate transport of meaning. That comes first. But then, right after that, I like an accurate transport of the author's voice. Tiffany alluded to that a little bit earlier. And last, but far from least, is that I am looking for a faithful rendition of any local setting. So that is what I am looking for in the translations that Dalang publishes. So my turn to ask you a question, Diana.
Okay. I hope I can answer. Okay, yes.
What do you like the most in your father's writing? And of course, the obvious. Which piece in Orang Bloomington is your favorite and why?
Okay. Frankly speaking, I'm having difficulty understanding my father's writing. To me, my father is able to unify past, present, and the future, just using description of his environment and entering the minds of people surrounding him. I've often watched him sitting quietly by himself in a public place such as university's cafe or canteen, just taking notes in the little notebook he always brings and, carried in his shirt pocket. So it won't, it's not, people will think that he's just taking simple notes. But those simple notes can make a novel. That's what makes me, he's so awesome. So one of my favorite stories in Orang-Orang Bloomington or People from Bloomington is the same as similar to Tiffany's choice, yeah? Laki-laki tua tanpa nama, or The Old Man with No Name. Seems strange for a title and seems very serious, yeah? Well, in the beginning, I assumed that the story is about a community of senior citizens that have a solemn atmosphere. I expected the characters to be in despair because it's solemn and they're senior citizens. To the contrary, the plot was fun and humorous. Yeah, my father was able to create lively interactions between the female characters and the storyteller. Their funny chit-chat reveals my father's sense of humor while it describes the women's and the storyteller intense loneliness and curiosity about the man with no name that entered their world. Yeah, this writing is a very representative of my father's character. He was a very funny man, but not lonely. He was a very funny man. Yeah. Okay. I hope that would answer your question, Pulilian. Pulian. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's
yeah.
Okay.
And I also want to ask a question to Cynthia. I will not call you Mba, yeah, because you will not know. But you're still very young, so
No, I think I'm probably older than you. Look at the hair.
No, you're still also very young compared to me, so I'll call you Cynthia. So, what moves you to add a translation to your collection in your library? Thank you.
A core value of libraries is to have a diverse selection of materials. And we want our books and films to reflect our larger community and the global community. And we want to make sure that we, have voices from all communities around the world. And translated literature does that. And it opens up the world to people. So, and hopefully most of the translations are as smooth and as easy to read as Tiffany's. So, it's such a pleasure to read People from Bloomington. It's a joy to read. So
that's good.
I hope people will seek it.
Yes. Okay.
Cynthia, I don't know how many times I've told you how grateful I am for your openness and your support of foreign literature. And I'm speaking specifically to Indonesian literature because Dalang this year is 10 years old. And you have supported us from the very, very beginning. I remember walking to your library and you were still in Foster City and I walked in with my very first book. Yeah. So, and here we are. So, how do you think your patrons could benefit from reading a translation? And more specifically, what do you think they walk away with from reading?
Sorry, we're closing the.
Oh,
we're closing the library right now, so that was the announcement. Sorry.
Okay. So, what do you think they would walk away with after reading People from Bloomington?
I really do hope that this collection will open readers' eyes to how Americans are seen by somebody from a different culture. Budi Darma wrote this collection about 40 years ago, but so many of the situations feel the same. Suburbia, or it's a small town. At least Bloomington feels like a small town, and it feels very suburban. And people in suburbia are isolated. Neighbors can get really weird. We know that in Burlingame too. And the habits, and people pay attention to the habits of other neighbors, and parents worry about their kids fitting in. So the situations are still very relatable, and how he describes people is very eye-opening. So I think it's just, it will just open your view of how Americans are perceived to read it from and I'm going to just say an outsider's point of view. I shouldn't say outsiders, I'm not quite sure, a world from an Indonesian point of view. I guess I can say that. Anyways, so I have a question for all three of you, for Tiffany and Lian and Diana, or Diane. So what are your dreams for Indonesian literature on the world literary stage? What are you hoping for?
I'll take that one on first.
Okay.
And the library is now closed.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We are closed. Now
we are now closed. No more announcements. So sorry.
Yeah. So I would like to see our authors and translators to be as well read as authors and translators from other parts of Asia, as for instance, India or Korea or Vietnam. And given our stations in life, just look at the color of our hair. I think this is a ball that Tiffany can keep rolling.
The big ball.
The big red ball, Tiffany. Find yourself a red wheelbarrow and move.
Well, I will keep the ball rolling with this conversation. For my particular hopes, I think I'd like to see just more Indonesian literary works available in libraries and bookstores, and you know, they're like I've been helping put together a public database of translated Southeast Asian literature in English, and it is actually astonishing to see there is a lot that is available and a lot that has been published, but you know, a lot of it is not easily accessible. Right. So some of it's only in very certain libraries. A lot of it's not available in a bookstore anymore. Some of it's gone out of print. And I, you know, just love to see, I guess, more Indonesian literary works be stocked and available in the same way that, you know, the classics of, you know, like other countries even, you know, like French classics or whatever, you know, be available, to have it be available in
Russian classics.
Exactly. But Diane?
Oh, yes. So the big ball, Pulian. I hope this also can affect, you know, I would like to see more Indonesian literature to be taught in American universities. I think that's one big ball that, you know, can help spread how wonderful the Indonesian literary works are. So one way is introducing them in the universities, maybe in Australia, also in Australia universities. I believe that there are Indonesian literature studies or department in Australian universities. I've seen it before, but maybe more of them can add more departments or more, you know, teachers, lectures or something like that, or projects that work together with, so we know about Indonesian literature. I think that's what my dream is. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to end this portion of the evening with a reading from the book. Diane's going to read. Oh, I'm sorry. Tiffany's going to go first, I believe.
Oh no, I think.
Diana's going to read first. We're going to hear the Indonesian first, and then we'll finish with the English. Okay.
Yeah, but Tiffany is going to introduce the
that's right.
The piece first, otherwise nobody will know what
the context. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll give some context, and then Lian can read. Okay. So this is a story called Mrs. Elberhart, or in Indonesian, Nyonya Elberhart. And it is about this young man who's the narrator, who happens to become friends with this elderly woman, Mrs. Elberhart. And the funny, well, it's sort of funny, sort of, you know, darkly humorous. But basically, this is the scene where he's going to visit her in the hospital because he finds out that she's been hospitalized. But the reason she's been hospitalized is because he made an anonymous phone call to like the city to complain about the state of her yard and her house. So she spent all of this time cleaning up the yard and house. And then he figured out, because he didn't see her while walking by as usual, that, oh, maybe she's in the hospital. And then he called up the hospital and found out that his actions put her in the hospital. And they don't actually really know each other yet, but this is the start of their friendship. But Lian, if you want to.
I read my part. Okay. Yes. So this will be in Indonesia. I hope that it is clear enough for people that knows Indonesia. Okay. Hampir saja saya pulang. Tapi akhirnya entah dengan pertimbangan apa, saya menemui Nyonya Elberhart. Saya masuk ke kamarnya tanpa melalui juru rawat, karena kebetulan waktu itu juru rawatnya tidak ada. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just a few lines, and I'm sorry, my one will be longer, but hopefully it gives people a flavor. I almost turned back, but for whatever reason, I finally decided to meet Mrs. Elberhart. I was able to avoid talking to the nurse because she happened to be away. I found out Mrs. Elberhart was in a private room. and as such, without a roommate. This surprised me. How would she pay for it? As far as I knew, health insurance companies were only willing to pay for a shared room, or at the most a semi-private one. She was lying in bed when I entered. Upon seeing me, she attempted to distance herself by shifting her head to the far edge of her pillow. Even so, I could see her face clearly. And for the very first time, I was able to have a proper look. She must have had smallpox once, for it had left very fine scars, almost imperceptible. Before she could ask who I was, I introduced myself as someone who had passed by her house on occasion and waved. Then I said that I hadn't seen her for a long time and had discovered she was in the hospital by chance. Even as I spoke, she kept shrinking away from me. Since apparently she was unable to get up and run or even move her body, her only option was to keep shifting her head farther and farther. It reached a point where her head was dangling off the bed. Good thing she had a strong neck. If she didn't, her head might have snapped off and rolled onto the floor. At last, she gave in. There was no way for her to keep her distance from me. Her face emanated fear, her mouth was clamped shut, and she appeared to be trying to hold her breath. And yet, though her demeanor and behavior indicated that she didn't want me to come close, in her eyes shone a different story. She wanted to be friends. That is, if I were willing. Because of these conflicting messages, I found it difficult to discern what was really going on in her heart. Whether she was happy that I'd come, whether she believed what I said, whether she suspected that I was the sender of the letter, I had no idea. Suddenly, she asked if I was well. When I replied yes, she asked whether I had ever been ill. When I answered no, she narrowed her eyes, as if she had the power to tell whether I was speaking the truth. I ended up visiting her once every day, sometimes twice, and the nurses came to know me as Mrs. Elberhardt's good friend. Consequently, whenever I came, even outside of visiting hours, I received a friendly response. According to the staff, Mrs. Elberhardt was a very good patient and very scrupulous about her health. She was always inquiring whether this or that was good for her and whether this or that wouldn't make her sick. According to them, Mrs. Elberhardt merely suffered from overexhaustion, nothing more. All she needed was rest and various medicines to boost her strength. That's what they said, but I didn't quite believe them. I had a suspicion that she suffered from a serious illness. What it was, who knew? I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful to hear it both in the original and your reading as well. So we have a bunch of really excellent questions. So that's why I wanted to have enough time to get to them, and I really appreciate that. I know it's different time zones for everybody, and it's different times of the day. So thank you so much for everybody. Just once more, thank you for coming tonight and for participating. And the first question is, Diane, you have lots of questions, so get ready.
No.
Yeah, that's okay. It's from.
But thank you. Thank
Forgive
you
me
very
if
much.
I'm not saying your name right. From Riff Cool. So I hope I said that right.
Yes.
Your question is for Miss Diane. In your opinion, what makes Bloomington so special? Comparing Surabaya, for example, that inspires Mr. Budi Darma to write these stories. I mean, why did he write it based on Bloomington? That's good. Basically, I guess, I think you may have answered that earlier in a way. I think you said that your father would probably have written this book set in any city, but he happened to choose Bloomington because that's where he was doing his PhD. But I don't know, maybe you have a different idea about that.
I hope I can answer this.
Yeah.
The name is Rifkul.
Rifkul, thank you.
Yes, Rifkul. I like to read. One of my reasons that I like to read Budi Darma, I don't use Pak because he's an author, so I just say Budi Darma. So Budi Darma's work, because he is very, how do you say, he can make something simple into something very wonderful, very informative, very there's a lot of information about, about humanity. Like Bloomington, like what Tiffany, read in the email, that he is able to communicate with Tiffany with small, not small matters, but something like saying, how's your daughter? I think these questions are very common, but in a way, Barbudi is able to show affection and from simple things, and yeah, so I think that you don't have to be sophisticated to give, to other people. And Barbudi likes, if I may explain more about him, he likes to gather people from from the government, from the journalists, from students, from people like media, like newspaper sellers. I do not know whether in America you have that, but he likes to, have conversation with them. So that's why he enjoys simple things, how, talk with people on the streets, or maybe students that are having difficulties in a certain thing. He will help him or her out, or maybe with the government. I do not know whether this would help out, but when he goes to a seminar, comes out from the occasion, I mean, there will be a lot of people waiting for him, and what they wanted was not his popularity, but what they wanted was to be able to discuss with him, to have insights about something. And my father will have time just to take them, sit down, have a small drink, and can talk for hours, for maybe from 8 to 12 o'clock in the night, just to talk with them. So it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, but the important thing is that there's a discussion and there are insights, and that's one way. And I think that's how he writes his novels also. I hope I answer you, Rifku.
Thank you. I think you did a lovely job. The next question is from Norma. This can come from Tiffany or from Diana or from Lian, because Lian knew him so well. Do you know which American and Indonesian writers that Budi took inspiration from? Who is he? Tiffany, do you want to do that one?
I can speak a little bit about that, just because of, I wrote a little bit about it in the introduction.
Yeah.
For Indonesian writers, there are quotes from Hairil Anwar and also Umar Khayyam that are a little bit here and there quoted in the collection. He also mentions Donarto in the foreword, I think, as well. So those are the Indonesian authors. And then for American, I'm trying to think, actually, because I know he was very influenced by Kafka and Camus.
I think I read Faulkner too. Yeah. William Faulkner
a little, yeah. So he did quote Faulkner in the preface to the collection.
And of course, Jane Austen, although she's obviously British, but
yes, that's the thing.
He must have liked Jane Austen.
He's actually quite diverse. Like he kind of draws a lot from like the Western literary canon, not just American authors. Yeah. But yes, Jane Austen, he did his dissertation on Jane Austen. That sly humor is throughout People from Bloomington. So I hope that answered your question a little bit, Norma.
Okay.
And if anyone has anything else to add.
I'm trying to see if any of these can be combined. You guys are asking such lovely questions. Somebody Actually, I'll just go in order, sorry. So Grace from Singapore wanted to know from Diane, do you recognize any of the characters in the People from Bloomington collection? Do you remember any of that he may have based them on? I know you were a child when you were there, so if you don't remember, that's understandable, but do any of them look recognizable to you?
I mean, there are some that are, I think I know the person, but and then it changed into something that is real. It's that, I think that's how my father wants to, you know, describe a human being. Just take a small part of the real person, I mean the person, and then put it into a character. That's, you know, he puts all his he gives other personalities or other into this character. So if you ask me, do I know them, I would say I do not know them. I only maybe know about 10% which one is this person. But if I may mention from the other book, like Olenka is, you know, the people, or I think people that are living in the apartment, and there's, you know, meeting in the elevators. But I don't, that too I cannot mention. I know only 10%. The other 90% is made by Barbudi Darma. How would I know that? Yeah. But I think that's my answer. I hope I know them. Yeah. Maybe one of them is me. I don't know.
Yeah.
You hope.
I hope, yes.
I
asked one time. I asked once, but my father only smiled.
Very diplomatic of him.
Yeah, because there was a time when my father took me to watch a movie, and then my father told me which movie would you like to watch, and then the one from Hollywood, American movie, and the other is Indonesian. Of course, I was 19 years old, high school at that time. I told my father the American movie, and a week from when we watched, after we watched the movie, it was in Kompas or in Jawa Pos, saying that there's a student prefer to watch American movies then. So it's kind of tricky with my father. So, but I love him. I love how he really, you know, think grateful of Indonesia. Thank you. I'm sorry if I.
Oh no, you're great. So
I was one of them is me. Yeah.
Annie had a question for Tiffany. She's also thanked you all for tonight, but she wanted to hear about how the translation found a home at Penguin Classics. Did you have to bring it to them, Tiffany, or did they find you?
So I have never had a project where it's been brought to me. And I think this does say something about Indonesian, you know, like it doesn't work with, you know, like in the same way with some like French or German publishers where they have their own agents and all of that. So what happened with People from Bloomington is that I got really excited about, you know, doing the project. I approached Budi Darma to ask for his permission. We began working on it, and then the agent who represents my written work, but also my translations, helped me, you know, put together a proposal and all of that. And then was willing to work on the project, even though she didn't represent Budi Darma at the time. She had said, that's not a condition. You know, if he or his publisher don't want to work with me, that's fine too. We can make it happen. But, you know, just ask them and get in touch with them to see. And it turned out that, you know, they were very willing to have the agent who works with me work with them as well. So then the agent began sort of specifically looking for a good home for the collection. So that's how that worked. And I was in close contact with a collaboration with the agent about, putting together a proposal, answering any editor's questions, thinking about, places that might be a good fit.
Yeah, it takes so many people to bring this to the world. It's not just, two people, and a wonderful publisher. So there's that one. And thank you for that question. So we have an anonymous person who, this is more literary. We're going back a little more literary question, asking Tiffany and Lian, what do you think of his characters? Because they're not always black and white, are they? They're not always good, bad, they're kind of a blend, aren't they? And Diane too.
No.
Lian, maybe
Tiffany.
Yeah, well, I think that Barbudi's characters and his writing really show the kind of person he is. There's so much humanity in all of his stories. And the way he portrays his characters are with so much care. He loves his characters. You kind of see them alive with all their faults and everything that makes them endearing. It's like you just met a new friend type sort of thing. You're with him all the way on the page. That's what I think.
Yeah, or almost like you, Lian, you said friend, but like kind of like a frenemy in the case of People From Bloomington, because there is that, like even, right, a lot of these narrators, right, they're unhateable, but then because we get into their inner workings and their feelings, it just becomes so fascinating. Actually, and they're so quirky. They'll like be these throwaway lines that are like, and then I did this, and you're like, oh my goodness, what? But I just love it.
Yeah, at first you kind of think, my God, get real. But then as the story progresses and you get into it, you'll say to yourself, wait a minute, that poor guy or this poor woman, and somebody who could be at the beginning of the story, you kind of think, my God, what's with this person? At the end, you feel some kind of compassion, some kind of empathy towards them. Yeah.
In all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the power.
That's his trademark, I think.
Yeah.
That's his trademark.
So Tika has a lovely question, kind of a literary question too, more general and for all three of you. So what do you think would make people from other countries want to read more Indonesian literature? So what is the uniqueness of Indonesian literature? What makes it stand apart from, I don't know, say from other, from Korea or from Germany or what makes you all special?
I'm too partial. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut.
No, Lian, now's the time to have.
answer.
How can you not have an opinion? You are not a lady who lacks for opinions.
May I have an opinion?
Yeah.
Well,
of course.
Yeah, I'm Indonesian. Every time when you do something, you always you have to have permission. So it's a way. It's cultural.
Yes.
I think Indonesian literary, it's unique because, like in my department, he's now retired. There is a writer. His name is Pak Suharmono, and I told my father about his writing, And I thought that his writing is very beautiful because it's melodious. There's some kind of a way of how he writes. It's just not, you know, sentences, strict sentences, but it's melodious. And I thought I was being, you know, smart, but and when I told that to my friends, he said, "Do you think that your your evaluation is, I mean, it's compared to Barbudi?" So surprisingly, when he went to Brunei Darussalam to make like to be a keynote speaker, he mentioned this man's name, and he also says, you know, good things about his writing. And I was so I was so happy. I thought I was not out of my mind. I mean, I was in the same mind as Budi Darma, because I was explaining to Budi, and he was I think he's not a famous writer, but he writes like a melody, like in Indonesia, usually, because Indonesian is always, you know, how do you say, corrupted with other local languages, and it makes the story a bit difficult to understand if you're not in that, if you do not know that language. But Pak Suharmono is able to use Indonesian nicely, and he is able to, you know, describe things melodious, very nicely. So there are some Indonesian writers are able to do like that. Yeah, that's in my opinion. Yeah, thank you.
I'm kind of curious. So like Lian and Tiffany, what do you think, like, and Diane, but like some of the bigger themes, do you think are covered? I mean, I have an idea from Lian's translations, but I'd like to hear from the two of you, like maybe some of the bigger themes that might grab a worldwide audience, or might.
Yeah, I think this is a hard question for me to answer, because the reason I translate Indonesian literature is because of my background in Indonesian literature as, you know, someone of like Chinese Indonesian descent. So it's a bit like asking, you know, maybe someone from like I don't know, I feel very conflicted about saying like, oh, you should read Indonesian literature because of the food, or because of the topic, or because Indonesia is such a diverse country. And that's partly because, you know, like I almost feel like literature from a country should be read because why not? Because we should be able to read literature from all different kinds of countries and honor the experiences there. And because also, you know, for people from Wilmington, right, the reason that makes it really unique is actually because it's an Indonesian work about America, right? And actually, you know, in one respect, right, because translated literature tends to be read for its subject material, right? Unless you're dealing with like French existentialists or, you know, something like that, or like, you know, magic realists. Like, you know, people are like, oh, okay, I want to read an Indonesian book so I can learn about Indonesia. But I'm not sure if that's the best approach, because like literature is not necessarily a guidebook to a country's cultures or customs. And, you know, like if we did approach it from that aspect, then People from Bloomington, there would be no reason to translate it, I guess. So I do worry about taking that approach and saying like, oh, there are common themes and etc. Because I also think that writers are so diverse in terms of, yeah, what they choose to write about and how they choose to write it.
Yeah, one of the things that I always say to the writers I work with, remember, you are writing a literary work. You are not writing a tour guide. You are not writing a vacation, a holiday book. Yeah, it's different. It is different. So, and we do not want to come off as this mysterious land of just ghosts and myths and whatnot. We are real people. We have our own real issues. And there's enough to talk about in that sense. Our culture is very, very rich. We have a very colorful history. albeit very painful as well. And there is a lot to write about in that respect. Yeah. So that's my take.
Thank you. So just moving on quickly, we'll try to wrap up. We'll get to the rest of your questions. I think no more questions for now. We'll finish off with a few that we have left. So there's actually a really specific question for Tiffany. So the translation, why did you choose people from Bloomington instead of Bloomington people?
Okay.
What were you thinking about there?
I do see the question, yeah.
Okay.
So actually, it took a really long time to come up with the title. So the working title was the People of Bloomington, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then, was sort of, that was the working draft title. And I was just, thinking about it, and I was like, oh, maybe I should take off the people in Bloomington, the Bloomingtonians. And, this is because, right, the collection is also kind of inspired by, like the title, The Bostonians, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Bostonians by Henry James. There's that. There's the fact that, in the preface, in the dedication to the original collection, Barbudi actually writes his translation of the English title, which was The Bloomingtonians. So then, but then the question was it a bit of a mouthful, The Bloomingtonians, and all of that. And so actually this was, actually I was, just chatting with another author, actually also the person who helped connect me and Barbudi, Norman Erickson Pasaribu, and also asking him what are you thinking? And then I was asking Barbudi as well. And Barbudi was very he's like, whatever. At first he's like, well, what about this? What about that? And then we were both talking about it, and I was like, well, but do you think this? Do you think that? And he's like, yes, that's true. And then finally he was like, you know what? Tiffany, you just do what you think, because it's becoming a really complicated question, right? You're just And then finally, we ended up settling on people from Bloomington because of that line in the preface where he says, these would be people anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. I could have written this. I would have written a collection about people anywhere, depending where I happened to be at the time. I wrote about people from Bloomington because it happened to be I happened to be in Bloomington, and so I did want to keep that general aspect. So people, right? That's what the collection is about. I think that's the spirit of the collection. People in general, and then they happen to be from
Bloomington.
Yeah. So then I just that was how it was set, and then Barbudi was like, "I'm glad you got that decided." That was a very complicated conversation, but yeah. So.
But the title is always the hardest. The title and the tagline. Oh my God! You can just really regress over that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Let's see. We've got another one we have another one for people are very interested in how you do this translations, Tiffany. So I do not want to mess up his name. So Mohammed Yoga Endrianto. I apologize. I hope I came close.
You did it right. Yay,
yes, and
yeah,
he wanted to know how did you conquer your difficulties in translating? You've spoken a bit to this, but is it just how do you do that? How do you, when you get stuck, you can't always go back to the author. So do you have somebody you brainstorm with, or do you just keep working at it like any writer would?
Yeah. So, I was in the privileged position of being able to ask Barbudi himself if I had any questions. So one question that would come up was the word loteng, or which I was like, in some cases it was an attic, in some cases it was just like the top story of a building, and I managed to clarify that with Barbudi himself. So that was actually very useful. So that was how I surmounted most of the difficulties. One thing that actually doesn't come through in the English translation, because I just found it very difficult, was that, Barbudi, and this is his distinctive style, he throws in some Javanese words every now and then. And, that was something that I didn't end up kind of like being able to replicate in the same way. I, sometimes would give maybe the English prose a more, I guess, earthy flavor, or like regional flavor, I guess, and that was the closest thing I could come to in terms of thinking of how the Javanese would inflect the Indonesian. But obviously, right, like, so it's interesting, these characters are, speaking, like he's writing these stories in Indonesian with some Javanese words thrown in, but it's supposed to be in America. Yeah. So, so that was quite interesting. But I think I did finally just come to terms with the fact that we're meant to be thinking in that they're like just speaking naturally, like it's a bit like, do you know that Tom Cruise movie with Valkyrie, I think it's called? It's the one where
Valkyrie,
like the plot to like kill Hitler, but then it fails. Anyway, in the beginning, right, like you have like someone in German, and that's Tom Cruise's character who's supposed to be like German, and then it sort of morphs from German into Tom Cruise's voice. And as a result, Tom Cruise doesn't have to do German accent or speak German, right? Because we kind of assume that what he's saying is, like they're all speaking German. I think that's that sleight of hand that's happening there.
Yeah, it's so tricky to do dialogue. I can't even imagine. Oh, such a challenge. So let's see. So thank you for that one. Moving on down. These are such great questions, everybody. These are really thoughtful questions. Let's see. So this is from Sylvia. And Sylvia, I think it's T1, Sylvia T1. She's interested to know, do you read the passages out loud as you translate? Do you read the Indonesian first and then read it out loud in English to make sure it sounds okay, or?
Yeah, so that happens on occasion. So I don't always do that. I don't read the whole Indonesian version out loud and then read it again in English. But it's when I do have difficulty in particular with like certain parts where I want to get the flow just right. So this is Bu Sylvie. She taught me during graduate school at Berkeley. And she's the reason probably why I have eventually become a translator of Indonesian literature. So hi, Bu Sylvie. Nice to see you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Okay, let's see. Another one for Tiffany and for any of you. What do you think about his literary style? Do you think he has, well, maybe you've answered that a bit already. I guess there isn't. His I think we've sort of answered that he's, that he's a humanist and he takes simple situations. Yeah, he takes simple situations, but makes them complicated too. What else is he? Is there anything I'm missing? I think we've sort of, I think, it's kind of a bit hard to sum that up. Somebody has one for Diane. What life principle or view of life did your father affect you the most? What do you think his one of his principles affected you the most?
He's a great tutor for me. Because I was having difficulties in understanding many things, because when I had to be able to, adjust myself very fast and then come back to Indonesia and adjust myself very fast. There are a lot of questions. There were a time when I just can't take it anymore and I flunked. I skipped a grade. So, but my father was always, supportive, and he always encourages me. It's okay, because I had problems with language. So every time when I went back to Indonesia, and there's this language barrier, not because I cannot speak the language, but because I was more familiar of English and Javanese. So when they speak Indonesian, I was thinking, okay, I understand, but cannot use the language. So, but my father was always, it's okay, no problem. So I was most of the time I will take any problem easy, and he's very open-minded. Yeah, of course he's open-minded. I mean, he's been to many countries and he writes so many books, and he always gives like helps people out. So for me, he's a great tutor. I mean, if I write something and he only gave me notes, several notes, I don't like it, because I prefer him giving me a lot of notes, every line if it's possible, so I can have time to, learn. And those notes are very precious for me. I still have one. And every word, I remember every word, and I was reading, and he always writes, not type, he writes with his hand. So I love how he writes. So he's a great tutor for me. And if you have, maybe a lot of people also have the same feeling as me. If you're close with Budi Darma, Pak Budi Darma, then he will give you so many information. For me, it's information. It's not punishment. If something is wrong, something is bad, and he gives you every sentence, every word, for me it's very precious. So until now, I can be confident of myself. I can be, I can accept myself as what I am, and I'm not bashful of showing my own writing. Those are what Pak Budi has given me. So even though maybe my writing are not good, it's okay, no problem, just sit and write. That's what my father always say. Everything counts. So I'm not too bashful anymore about my own writing, because before, every time if I finish writing, and I always, I always walk, and I was hesitant. I'm very hesitant to give it to my father, and like,
That's okay.
So
I think that's a lovely answer, and actually I think that's a great one to wrap up on. That thank you for your thoughts about your father, and he does everything about him, everything you've all three have said about him. Just clearly he was not just a great writer, but also a really lovely person and a great educator as well. I guess I would like to, just once again thank Lian for bringing us all together and bringing us this evening. I know it's partially your life's work to do this, and I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for you for introducing me to Tiffany and to Diane and to Budi Darma. So thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
It was totally my pleasure. And thank you all. Thank you very, very much. To put up with my bossiness.
So everybody have a lovely evening or a lovely day. I know it's the next day in your part of the world. So have a lovely evening and good night. I'm going to close out the webinar now. We had a slight snafu with recording it, but we got most of it. So we'll do a little bit of editing and we'll get it up on the library's YouTube channel. And I will have Lian and Tiffany, you can distribute, and Diane, you can distribute it amongst your channels once we get it edited a bit.
On the website. We'll have it on the website.
Yes, we will. Yeah. So thank you again so much.
Very much again.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we can meet again.
Yes.
Okay.